She is amazing. She's one of my favorite human beings, Allie Miller.
Yeah. Thank you. Don't anyone try to bring me guff, because we're not taking it. I like that. Okay, so hey everyone, how are we feeling on day 3? Pre-lunch break. Awesome. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about all things food as medicine, as well as functional medicine approaches to your keto. So we're going to problem solve some of the pitfalls that I see. We're going to talk about advanced labs. We're going to talk about supplementation and strategic therapies, and of course, what foods you can consume in abundance. We talk so much about removal, but what foods we can consume in abundance to help drive metabolic pathways and support biochemical response in the body. So let's do it. So how many of you guys, a little background. For those of you guys that don't know about me, my name is Allie Miller. You can find everything at Allie Miller RD on Instagram, Facebook. The website is alliemillerrd.com. I have a background in integrative functional medicine. So I went to a naturopathic college of medicine, and then I ended up getting licensed as a registered dietitian. So I kind of have one bank in the conventional allopathic world, and then I have another leg in the riverbank of more of the naturopathic functional medicine is what marries the two of them. And so functional medicine, we'll get into in a moment, it's really addressing the root cause of chronic conditions. I have been clinically using a ketogenic diet since 2009. I have a Naturally Nourished is the name of my podcast and my supplement line and my virtual clinic. And I'm the author of 3 books, the most recent one coming out in September, which is the Anti-Anxiety Diet Cookbook. So, how many of you, show of hands, are familiar with the term functional medicine? I think this is growing. This is a good thing. Good, that's awesome. So I love to describe myself as a detective of the body. I love working with a new patient and really unpacking their history, their triggering events, or what I like to call antecedents, driving layers of dysfunction in their body, and seeking the root cause. So above the surface, this visual of an iceberg is a very practical way of understanding what functional medicine is. In the standard conventional allopathic model, we work mostly on diagnosing and then following an algorithm or a protocol to address. And there's checks and boxes to check off. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I don't fit in a box very well. And I like to work with zebras or people that maybe don't get the outcomes when 1 + 2 does not equal 3, right? And so when we look underlying mechanisms, we see above the surface diagnosis, things like cancer, things like diabetes, things like rheumatoid arthritis or other autoimmune conditions. We see fibromyalgia, we see obesity, and anything with an itis is an inflammatory condition. And then below the surface is where we're seeing the drivers of that expression of that chronic illness and where we want to seek as a functional practitioner to resolve, not put a Band-Aid on the symptom. So everything is connected in our body, right? And I've spent the last 3 years of my career really delving into this HPA-Axis. And this stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal feedback of our body. The hypothalamus and pituitary are in the brain, and the adrenals being tiny little walnut-sized glands that sit above our kidneys. And this feedback is what regulates our fight or flight, sympathetic stress response, or our rest, digest, parasympathetic space. And you've heard a lot of intelligent practitioners, bodybuilders, coaches talking about the importance of parasympathetic state. And I think that that's so cool that this is a strong conversation we're having. It's important to understand that in that parasympathetic state, not only is it rest and digest, but it's also reproduce, metabolize, and regulation in the body. So if we're running in fight or flight mode, all of those processes are going to be hindered. And we'll unpack that a little bit further today. But we're talking about anything from a symptom of excessive thirst to a sign of body temperature dysregulation to hindered metabolism of fat or not being able to produce ketones naturally in the body. All of these things can be if that HPA axis is in too high of a sympathetic state. So let's first talk about the benefits of ketosis. And I'm going to kind of breeze through these because I know we're all here. We believe in the magic of ketones, right? We've all experienced either personally or a family member or have enough compelling drive to be here, right? And be present through all of this science and theory. I want to also talk to you guys about, though, where ketosis can be limiting for your body and strategy that you might need to implement to troubleshoot. So first, let's go through the pros. Body composition change, right? We know that when you're in a state of nutritional ketosis, your HGH goes up. That's going to support your metabolic state by supporting your muscle mass, right? We know that you can drive metabolism of your endogenous, your body fat, to make ketones, right? And that's why we don't want to chase fat in the diet in a state of nutritional ketosis. We need a very individualized macro distribution based on our metabolic handicap when we start the process, based on our amount of insulin resistance, and based on our amount of body fat. All of that should be tailored. We know that on a satiety level, leptin, which I'll talk about a lot today, leptin is one of those primary satiety hormones that tells the body that we're fed or we're satiated, so we don't need to keep eating. We also know that reductions of insulin can bring down hypoglycemic blood sugar drops. So we've all experienced at some point hanger, right? Where you're hungry, angry, short fuse. And often that happens after a blood sugar spike followed by a crash. That's why a lot of people say, before they've experienced keto or being fat adapted, oh, I just don't eat breakfast because if I eat breakfast, I'm hungry like an hour later. That's because their breakfast is cereal, banana, orange juice. So they spike super high and they get that radical hypoglycemia, which drives hunger. So satiety is a great thing. Anti-inflammatory. If you are eating a clean, real foods keto, you're pulling out gluten, you're pulling out soy, you're pulling out corn, you're pulling out a lot of these products that we know are either high in omega-6, tend to be genetically modified, and then have the curse of neurotoxins in the glyphosate. We're looking at removing inflammatory compounds from the response of blood sugar distress, and that A1C being a marker that tends to correlate with CRP, our main inflammatory marker of the body. So removing inflammatory foods, and then the mechanism of actually producing ketones, right, is going to reduce the oxidative stress. We know cognitive improvement, so again, that reduced reactive oxygen species in the brain. We have improvement in BDNF, right, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And we also know mood and satiety, and my big piece on anti-anxiety is that we're reducing epinephrine, which is that main adrenaline fight-or-flight chemical. This is one of the mechanisms in which ketosis is very therapeutic for seizures. We also know that we enhance GABA expression, and GABA is that feel-good, mellower out inhibitory compound that mellows out the hustle of the stress response. GABA is what becomes deficient, or we have issues with docking GABA when we're dealing with like Parkinson's disease, or we're dealing with tremors, dryness in the mouth from performance reviews and anxiety-driven activity. And then we know that ketosis is a hormone modulator. And this is something that I think we're just starting to discuss a little bit more. So ketosis impacts the pituitary quite directly. The pituitary is the part of the brain that makes that HGH, the human growth hormone, right? The pituitary is also what regulates your FSH and your LH, your follicular stimulating and your luteinizing hormone in women. It also is going to impact your gonadotropin releasing hormone, which drives basically all hormone production throughout the body. We know that there tends to be a favorable ratio improvement of FSH to LH when we go ketogenic, and this is one of the drivers in fertility in women. We know also that reduction of insulin reduces androgenic hormone in women, right? So that's a favorable change when we're looking at like PCOS. And we know that when you lose fat as fuel, as I talked about in the medical panel, your adipocytes or your body fat cells are estrogenic themselves. So you're actually metabolizing estrogen stores in your body. So I want to talk about how ketosis can address the root cause of 4 primary clinical diagnoses, and then how you can accelerate your outcomes with nutritional support or food as medicine. So let's talk with fatty liver. I think that this is a big confusion, and unfortunately, I've had many clients where their doctor diagnoses them with NASH, and they tell them they can't do keto. It's too high fat. That's going to stress the liver. And I really have to beg to differ. If you're doing a diet that is, if you have excessive body fat, and you're doing a calorie-restricted ketogenic diet, meaning that you're supporting your body's your body's metabolism of your fat stores as fuel versus chasing fat in your mouth to make ketones, right? That is going to be favorable because you are going to burn that visceral fat, which is closest to the glands. That is going to be the best way to reduce fatty liver, is going into a nutritional ketosis state. You're also pulling out fructose, which is a hepatotoxin. So fructose is actually a toxin to the liver that drives fat deposits and accelerates triglyceride production in the body. You can boost food as medicine if you have fatty liver, you have elevated ALT or AST liver enzymes, and you want to get a little bit of additional support. I highly recommend bringing in an omega-3 fatty acid, at least at 2 grams a day of a combination of the active EPA DHA. I like to ensure that it's sourced from wild-caught fish and that it is tested by a third party for potency and purity so that you know it's free of things like PCBs and mercury and other contaminants that we see in our oceans. And also that it is what it says it is. There's a lot of brands out there of fish oil that you'll get at your grocery store that'll have soybean oil as a filler. Not a good idea to have omega-6 in your focused omega-3 supplement. And eating wild-caught fish 2 to 3 times a week is a great way to support that metabolic transition. Choline is a superfood for the liver. Egg yolks and liver are the 2 highest sources of choline, so that's a great food as medicine boost right there. Liver and detoxification support. You have to drive the filtration in the process, so you want to drive bile flow, right? Especially if you don't have the storage tank, your gallbladder. If you've already had a gallbladder removal, you want to drive that bile flow from your liver. You don't want liver stagnation, which is going to interfere with your detox process. So this is where we might do like a lemon and turmeric shooter. You can Google that on Ali Miller RD, lemon turmeric shooter, and it's basically a blend of lemon, turmeric, and ginger, and you take that first thing in the morning, very anti-inflammatory and going to stimulate that bile flow. Pretty much anything that's a bitter, like leafy greens, dandelion, anything that makes you go in the back of your cheek, that's going to spurge bile out from your liver and drive that detox process, at least the phase 1 activity. Optimizing hydration because you want to maintain filtration. And then considering detox supports that have phase 2 sulfur-containing compounds as well. So I'm talking about things like glutathione, I'm talking about things like calcium D-gluconate, and these compounds that can help to drive the encapsulation and excretion process of detoxification. So another root cause, mitochondrial and neurological. So ketones are the cleanest fuel that you can burn, right? We know that there is less reactive oxygen species from the metabolism of ketones than there is of glucose. We know that it is a direct mitochondrial builder, and that ketones can play mitohormesis, which basically means it stresses the mitochondria to a level that enhances the production of antioxidants from the mitochondria itself. And we're going to talk today about allostatic load and where you can make your negotiation with your body and your system of what stress is going to make you more resilient and what stressors you choose to take on that are going to make you depleted. And it's really important to have that conversation because a lot of us being health nuts are type A individuals that we hear something's cool and healthy for us and we just layer without listening to the feedback of the body. So boosting your mitochondria, we're looking at MCT, we're looking at coconut oil, we are looking at, you can do MCT powder if you're having bowel intolerance to higher levels, that's a reasonable option. CoQ10 is a fantastic supplemental support, especially if you are taking a statin drug, which blocks that production pathway. And you can get this in foods that have organs. They're gonna get your highest CoQ10 in things like oysters, which have the organelle within them, or sardines. Danny talked a lot about the importance of consuming organs in his lecture. We're also going to get carnitine to support the mitochondria. Carnitine is actually my go-to if someone's having a hard time producing ketones. L-carnitine, there's a pathway in the body called carnitine synthase shuttle, and the production of carnitine and getting your carnitine levels boosted is going to help your body to convert fat into ketones and use a fuel source from fat. Red meat is the richest form of carnitine. I probably don't have to say that here, but I want people eating red meat 4 to 5 times a week, 4 to 5 times a week. That'd be a lot, that'd be aggressive. 4 to 5 times a week and really focusing on grass-fed sourcing. And then B vitamins, super important for energy production and metabolism. Another root cause, leaky gut and dysbiosis, right? So when we go keto, we are removing excessive sugar, which likes to feed as a fuel source candida, other forms of yeast that are pathogenic, and pathogenic bacteria in general likes sugar. It's easy to metabolize, and it's going to create more overgrowth symptoms. So when we're doing a ketogenic diet, we're free of the primary gut irritants of those pro-inflammatory foods. We're also, with that carb restriction, going to play a role in starving off bacterial overgrowth, right? And maybe potentially get a little bit of a reset there. And then you make butyrate in the process of producing ketones. And butyrate is also made in the colon by the presence of bifido and lactobacteria strain. But butyrate in the production of ketosis supports the epithelial lining or the lining of your gut. So pretty cool, just in doing keto alone. Then you can take next level and start to consume therapeutics like bone broth, gelatin, collagen, which all help with that secretory IgA, the mucosal membrane lining of the gut, right? We have on the blog bone broth 3 ways. So if you get sick and tired of drinking hot meat juice, I mean, I don't know, you might want to play with blending in things like fresh lime juice or cilantro or blending ghee into it, making a butter bones broth. These all make it more palatable, but also are going to enhance the therapeutic effect. Copious amounts of real salt in there, great for electrolyte restabilizing in the body. Desserts and gummies with gelatin, very therapeutic, and in the summer might be a more welcomed addition of gut restoration. And then we have a product called GI Lining Support, which has L-glutamine, which is basically the fuel source and the building block for our enterocytes, which is the fancy word for our gut cells. So you actually have to repair the house to heal your leaky gut, right? And then there's probiotic-rich foods. I like to say a cup of culture a day keeps the doctor away. Rotating between pickled vegetables, krauts. There's a bunch of fun things now on the market like Gut Shot by Farmhouse Cultures, which you can just drink an ounce of, kombucha, and then also looking at other effervescent beverages out there. And just consuming to an amount that works within your metabolic flexibility is all going to be fair game. Now, if you haven't tolerated probiotics, or you've taken a probiotic and you felt like an atom bomb went off in your belly, then you're probably in a dysbiotic state. So we all have 3 to 5 pounds of bacteria within our system, right? And if we introduce a good army and we get negative feedback and it's either explosive or crampy or distension and bloating that we feel like we have a food baby, that's all some form of fermentation or feedback that there is a state of dysbiosis. And so we likely need to plow the gut, do some form of a cleanse, layer in things like berberine, caprylic acid, oregano oil to plow the gut before we can inoculate and reseed. And you can actually look up good Google search, Ali Miller Probiotic Challenge. This is another thing I do in clinic where I have people start with 15 billion CFUs of a blend of lacto and bifido with no prebiotic fibers. You don't want inulin or FOS or anything to distract your gut. Just a 15 billion lacto and bifido, and you increase in 3-day increments by 15 billion up to 60. And so at the end, you look on your waist circumference from rise to rest. Does your abdomen get flatter? Did your bowel formation improve by increasing the probiotic, or did it decline, or did it not change at all? So if it improves, that means you're coming at a state of gut sterility. If it declines, that means you're in a state of dysbiosis and overgrowth, and you need to go forward with a cleanse. And if there's no change, you're probably already in a symbiotic state. So another root cause, infertility and hormone imbalance. So hormones are manufactured from fat. How cool is that? And eating a high-fat diet. Now, I was talking a little earlier about not chasing fat consumption to produce ketones, but if we're talking about an individual that is of an ideal body fat or has recently lost a dynamic amount of body fat and has lost their period and is at an age where they should be menstruating, this is probably some form of hypothalamic amenorrhea, especially if we're over-exercising and we're over-calorie restricting. So we need to be mindful of the fact that we need to consume ample fat, especially if we don't have the fat stores on our body, because that's going to help with the production of hormone in the body. We will see the reduction of insulin, which is going to help, like I said, metabolize androgens. So with PCOS, we tend to see low vitamin D, elevated testosterone, and elevated DHEA. All of that can be corrected in part by going ketogenic because you bring down that insulin, but you also metabolize DHEA as a precursor in the production of ketones. So that's further going to help to support that hormone balance. And then I mentioned on the FSH and LH. Food as medicine support for hormones. Flaxseed. So you may have heard that flax is estrogenic, but it does support the metabolism of estriol, which is more of an antagonist of estrogen. It has estrogenic activity, but it works against estrogen dominance in the body and works as a SERM, or a selective estrogen receptor modulator. So it has expression that can help whether you're going through perimenopause or menopause hot flashes, and that estrogen dip is what's creating symptom in the body, or if you're dealing with just pure estrogen dominance and you want to compete with that estrogen engaging in the receptor site. So I love 2 tablespoons or 5 to 6 flackers, and I recommend for cycling women to do this days 1 through 12, because at day 12 we start to transition more with progesterone to take the lead with hormone cycle change. Inositol, one of my favorite B vitamin cousins when we're talking about hormone support. Inositol enhances cellular signaling. Inositol is found in the zest of our citrus. Inositol helps with both ovarian hormone production and tends to support progesterone more favorably. Again, many women that are dealing with hormone imbalance have estrogen dominance, either from excessive estrogen or from a normal amount of estrogen, but a depleted amount of progesterone. So focusing on inositol can help to create synergy within that hormone expression. Organs are also a great form of inositol. Then, like I said, citrus zest, leafy greens, and even molasses in small amounts can be very supportive. Maca is one that Dr. Quebeca talks about a lot, and that's an adaptogen that tonifies the pituitary gland, right? So hitting direct in that HPA fight or flight axis. And then I always recommend, if you're dealing with hormone imbalance, that you remove dairy. Give your body at least 6 weeks, especially if you're dealing with hormonal acne or you have a known form of estrogen dominance and it's from an excess level. Dairy is estrogenic in nature, so we have to acknowledge that and potentially remove that excess if we're looking to create more balance in the body. And then beyond the liver being one of the production spaces for hormone and also the detoxifying organs, the colon plays a huge role with regulation of hormone, okay? And so you want to ensure that you have healthy bowel motility, that bowels are regulated. Magnesium bisglycinate is my favorite form of magnesium because it's a neuromuscular relaxer. Magnesium citrate is the cheapo stuff that's osmotic, meaning it pulls water to the colon as a stool softener, but that's the one that can create bowel dependency and also is not going to offer the therapeutic effect for the 300 plus enzyme needs that we have for magnesium. So definitely look at that. I have a supplement called Relax and Regulate, which has both the magnesium bisglycinate and the inositol that I've been speaking to. Cruciferous vegetables, fantastic for colon detox support, and then calcium D-gluconate. So let's talk a little bit about detox, and then we'll talk about allostatic load, which is a fun topic. I'm a huge proponent of nutritional detoxification, and a lot of people will say, you have a liver, and you have a kidneys, and you have a colon, and you're good, right? That may be fair and true, but in this industrialized age of lifestyle, we are all susceptible to the 6 billion pounds of toxins that are released in our environment on a daily basis. And a lot of us are starting to become in tune with the impact of xenoestrogens in plastics, right? We're starting to become in tune about endocrine disruptors, which are in our also pesticides, perfumes, and many other additives that are quite ubiquitous within any product that's in the middle of a grocery store, right? The exposure in our dry cleaning chemicals, volatile organic compounds in our paint, in our mattresses. And so regardless of if you're eating only at your farmer's market and you know the guy who slaughtered your cow, that's all awesome, but we still need nutritional detoxification. And when we are losing fat as fuel, we're releasing the longevity of our story of exposure to toxins and stress. So if you've lost 10% of your body weight, right? So if we're talking about someone that started at 150 and they lost 15 pounds, that is the time that they should be doing some form of a supplemented support nutritional detoxification, because they are at that stage using their endogenous fat as fuel. They're upregulating that metabolic process, but those endocrine disruptors, the estrogenic compounds from their adipocytes, and cortisol, which is stored in their fat, is being released through that weight loss journey, and we need to give it a leg up to upregulate the nutrients that drive that encapsulation and excretion process of the phase 2 enzymes of detox support. So it's like you're changing the oil filter in your tank of your body, right? If you know your body's doing heavy work, using fat as fuel, you need to support the process. Otherwise, you will find yourself, I see it all of the time after successful weight loss, having dynamic hormone imbalance, having out of the blue insulin resistance and blood sugar spikes when your diet is still really tight, very low carb, and it is often the why. Okay, so what does detox look like? There's 2 phases of nutritional detoxification. Phase 1 is going to be hydroxylation, making a fat-soluble compound water-soluble. Within that process, we look at things like drivers of bile, like I was talking about, leafy greens, lemon, bitters. These things upregulate the filtration of the liver. We're also looking at friends like glutathione, which is the granddaddy antioxidant, which is found in foods like avocado and can help with both the activation and conversion of water solubility, as well as phase 2, which is more important, the encapsulation and excretion pathways. This is where sulfur is required in the detox pathway. And this is where a juice cleanse is not a detox. I'm not standing here to tell you that you need to drink green juice and not eat your protein. I want you to consume animal product protein throughout an entire detox, because those sulfur-containing compounds are what really help in that encapsulation and excretion pathway. So we're talking about things like N-acetylcysteine and all of these compounds that are in the cruciferous family, but also in animal product. And it's very important that when we're looking at the biochemical processes, that we're supporting that phase 2 encapsulation excretion, because otherwise, if you're just hitting phase 1, you're activating the toxins that were released, and that's creating more free radical overload and distress to the body. And we actually see that in cancer research. People that have inadequate, so cytochrome P450 are the activation enzymes in phase 1. There's particular enzyme pathways in phase 2 that, if not supported, will drive more free radical action in the body and essentially dysplasia, cellular distress, and would be more prone towards cancer. So where can keto cause distress? Digestive, we can see both ends of the riverbanks. We can see constipation, we can see diarrhea. We can see blood pressure regulation issues, right? Often electrolytes are going to help mediate this, and hydration, and once you get adapted. But the adrenal glands make aldosterone. The adrenal glands can have a huge role on your blood pressure regulation. And then there's the hormonal, adrenal, and thyroid piece of the puzzle. I do want to say that this is generally based on leptin and estrogen changes. And so I want to unpack that, because I think that'll be some of the novel stuff that I share with you today. And this all comes back to this HPA-Axis. Does the body feel safe in a parasympathetic state, or does it feel in a state of fear and distress? Because everything in your body is going to respond differently based on that pendulum swing. The majority of these symptoms are not from keto alone, but are from an imbalance in allostatic load. So let's define what that is. I've now spit that at you like 3 times. And before I do that, I want to share one of my favorite mantras, which is doctrine creates disconnect. And that means that if you are doing something because an influencer told you it worked for them, or it worked for their client, and you are losing your hair, you are feeling hypoglycemic, you have tremors, you're dealing with insomnia, and your body is literally yelling at you, this isn't working, you need to connect within your feedback of your body to listen to what is right for you. And what you need today will be very different from what you need in March, which will be very different in what you need next summer, and so forth, because we are evolving beings. We're constantly redirecting our external stressors, our consumption of nutrients, and then also there's changes with life cycle and output demand. So if we're troubleshooting our digestion, I want to sorry guys, I put way too much stuff in here. All right, I want to hit this part right in here. Okay, potential pitfalls of keto and intermittent fasting on thyroid. Let's talk about this. So the thyroid hormone requires glucose for production, right? We've heard that. It's really important to understand that when you're in a state of nutritional ketosis, your glucose does not go to 0, right? We have glucose. We're hybrids. We are a hybrid machine. You may drop your glucose to 50, and that's like usually a low with like a prolonged fast or what have you. But you're always going to have enough circulating glucose to do what your body needs to prioritize for brain function and for thyroid hormone production. So I'm never concerned about that, right? The thyroid releasing hormone is in the hypothalamus. The thyroid stimulating hormone is in the pituitary. So those are the H and the P of this stress axis, okay? Reverse T3 will go up with increase of cortisol. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. So if you're freaking out about if you're working third shift and not getting sleep, if you have a deadline, if you have a wedding, it could be happy stress. If you're going through a divorce, you're going to be surging cortisol, right? And when you're surging cortisol, that tells the body, I don't know if this is safe, I don't know what Allie's doing, but let's slow down her metabolism, and reverse T3 goes up. And that's a direct brake on free T3, which is your active gas on your metabolism. We also know that cortisol itself directly interferes with the conversion of T4 to T3. And T4 is the precursor, T3 is the active gas, okay? And we know that, though, on the other hand, keto can support the thyroid. We know that keto being free of gluten, if we're talking about antibodies in the thyroid gland, gluten as a compound interferes with binding of the thyroid hormone. So removing gluten should be very therapeutic. Having a high-fat diet should help with thyroid hormone production, right? And the ketogenic diet meat is one of the best sources of B vitamins and minerals. So we should be getting a rich, abundant nutrient source to support thyroid function as well. But the big picture with this is it's the over-restriction of not consuming enough calories and also the overdrive of stress demand that is going to create the dysfunction. Because if you're not putting out excessive cortisol, keto can be very healing for your thyroid, okay? It's about how your body responds to these stressors. So when I look at the thyroid, I'll let you guys take a picture. These are the biomarkers I look at. These are my ideal reference ranges, and I like to look at thyroid peroxidase, inflammation in the gland, antithyroid globulin, of course, that's the one I referenced as the one that gluten interferes with. We like to look at the free forms of thyroid to really see the activity. And you can layer food as medicine for the thyroid with keto. You can incorporate, of course, iodine-rich foods from your seaweeds and your sea vegetables and your seafood, right? We can enhance our antioxidants and B vitamins from adding in leafy greens and avocado and other herbs and spices and seasonings. Brazil nuts, super therapeutic as a rich source of selenium. And then nuts and seeds in general. So what are the pitfalls in keto if your HPA-Axis is in overdrive? Ketosis itself is a hormetic stressor, and that needs to be acknowledged and discussed a little bit again. Leptin fluctuating. Leptin is that satiety hormone, right? So leptin is made by your small intestines based on the presence of fat consumption. Leptin is also made by body fat. And so when we're coming at a state of obesity, we have leptin resistance, just like insulin resistance. So when we go keto and the insulin levels go down, leptin starts to be sensitized, and that's a good thing. We get this satiety, our appetite is regulated, and we're good. Now, if you're talking about a woman that's at 18% body fat, she's not making leptin by her fat reserve. She's only making leptin from the fat that's consumed in the diet. Right? And we have leptin receptors on our thyroid, we have leptin receptors on our ovaries, we have leptin receptors throughout the body, but the majority of the receptor is in that hypothalamus of the brain, which is the H of this HPA-Axis of stress regulation. So we have to be mindful that when leptin gets depleted, that's going to be the first thing that's going to drive loss of cycle in a female. Sexual hormone decline will go down when leptin levels dip, which could mean we get low libido. We can drop oxytocin, which is that bliss reward seeking, okay? And that's what's released during orgasm. That's made by the pituitary gland. And basically, we're in a reactive versus regulatory state. We also can see DHEA levels being influenced by that stress axis in the body. If we're in chronic fight or flight mode, we might be putting out too much DHEA. Over time, if we're in a state of adrenal insufficiency, we might be insufficient in DHEA, and we may need to take adrenal glandular or support with supplemental DHEA to be able to produce ketones in the first place, because that does play a role with the production pathway. We also know that fasting itself can drive epinephrine. So epinephrine, again, is that adrenaline response in the body, and it's a survival mechanism. Now, everyone's going to respond differently. You will fast in a much more successful outcome if you are able to chill your hustle. If you could be on a beach with your feet in the sand and have waves hitting you, I think that for a person of a low body fat, they could fast for 3 days easy, no problem. But for a person that is of a low body fat, and again, I'm not talking to everyone, for people of high body fat, rock on. You can fast. You have reserves. But for people of low body fat, if they're also a mother of 3, if they're also not sleeping, if they're also overcommitting and they're type A and they're running on high and they're exercising and they're drinking caffeine, they probably will not do well beyond a 16-8 because their body will start to put out survival hormone response because that's a big hormetic stressor for their system, and they don't have the reserves of the feedback to tell the HPA-Axis that they are safe. And then cortisol, as I mentioned before, is also released from your fat cells themselves. So if you are in a state of upregulation of fat metabolism, that can definitely hit the load. So what is allostatic load? So symptoms we can see, let's first define what it is. So basically it's the wear and tear on our body, and it's going to be the impact of how resilient our body is to all the layering effects of stressors, okay? So allostasis is the regulation of homeostasis or balance in the body in response to physiological or mental emotional stress demand. Signs of imbalanced allostatic load are hair loss, chronic fatigue, depression, and mood disorder, sleep deprivation, acne, illness, and viral flares. Basically, the body, again, not feeling safe is the easiest way that I can explain that. So you have to select your stressors, and you have to acknowledge that some of your stressors you have no influence on or may need to resolve in a greater scheme. Like, for instance, dysbiosis is a stressor. No one's like, I want the dysbiosis, like you don't choose that. But if you have gut bacteria overgrowth, that bad bacteria, that pathogenic bacteria actually drives epinephrine expression in the body. And then the lack of the lacto and bifido is going to suppress your production of serotonin and GABA. So you're actually driving a perpetual stress demand based on your bacterial state. And if you are in a state of dysbiosis, that means that you have to be mindful when you're selecting your sleep restriction, your exercise, your caffeine, and these other selective stressors on what the max is for you. So calorie restriction, time-restricted eating, emotional loads, mental, sleep deprivation, caffeine, toxicity, sauna and cryotherapy. Again, these are hormetic stressors that can make the body more resilient, or if done too long or in the wrong way or not in a synergistic balance in the body, can harm. So I've hit on cortisol many times, and cortisol significantly matters. There's this trifecta of what I call burnout, again, of over-restriction, over-exercising, over-caffeinating, under-sleeping, and then feeling undervalued, underloved, not getting that self-actualization. As well as having some cognitive disconnect of maybe not feeling that you're living your bliss, you're working a job you don't like, or X, Y, Z. And so when we hit too many of those on our plate, that's going to create this signaling that's going to create the glucocorticoid response or glucose production from the stress hormone. In fact, I was talking to Dr. Anna Kabeka. She's wearing a continuous glucose monitor, and she said she came on stage fast and her blood sugar went up to 150 on stage. And she's cool, she knows her stuff, right? But this is just a natural stress response, and we have to understand that there's metabolic impact from that. So we can be stressed and wired, or we can be stressed and tired. Stressed and wired is that HPA-Axis is in overdrive mode, okay? This is an excessive output, generally speaking, of cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Those are all made by the adrenals, right? This is usually where we're going to see more visceral fat, the apple belly. We're going to see elevated blood sugar levels. We're going to see insulin resistance. And we're going to see anxiety, insomnia, racing thoughts, and just feeling hardwired. So if we're stressed and wired, there's also the opposing side of stressed and tired, like this guy here. And in this sense, we're going to see more chronic inflammation because cortisol, just like everything in the body, we can't demonize. We have to understand what's the mechanism of action and how is that expressed in my body, not in Allie's body, not in so-and-so's body. How is it expressed in my body? Because when cortisol goes too low, if you're taking something like, let's say, phosphatidylserine or magnolia bark, something to mitigate the spikes of cortisol, and you don't know where you're testing and where you're falling, you could be suppressing the corticosteroids, which are your natural anti-inflammatory for your body, right? So we can deal with chronic systemic inflammation. We can deal with bloating and distension from low cortisol, which often then people go on a bacterial cleanse, and they really needed to just mellow that parasympathetic state, and that's going to in itself respond as far as the treatment of leaky gut. Because when cortisol dips, we can have more histamine response. We can have more food sensitivities. We can have chronic fatigue, depression, bloating, and fluid retention in the body. So subtraction often yields addition as far as balance and whole body health, right? If it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. What lights you up? What are the parts of your wellness journey that you heard as aha moments that you're gonna add? And just like when you're filling your closet with a new wardrobe, if you're adding something in, what are you going to modify or remove so that you don't just tack, 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 tack until your body combusts, breaks down, or quits on you, right? So we need to think of these inhibitory compounds. I'm a huge fan of use of GABA in terms of something like this where I have to be on stage. It doesn't allow me to have any tremor. I feel super chill. It's a direct inhibitory compound that mellows out that epinephrine stress response. It is a Band-Aid. It's not going to correct the process. The process is going to be the lifestyle and then working with things like adaptogens, nervines, and strategic nutrients. So food is a double-edged sword. Everything we put in our body is going to work for us to either promote building pathways to boost and support the body or to create distress. And these are really how we have to start looking at nourishing. You've made it into nutritional ketosis, but now how can you start layering some of the abundance-based things to really heal from the inside out? And was that my Q&A time too? I went through it all? Okay. I'm sorry, guys. I'm out. Oh, okay. Okay. Let me give you two more things. Okay, so, okay. Sorry, I did so many slides. These are just some quick techniques that I do. Bone broth fast is one of my favorite ways to support gut integrity. A great way to reset if you're looking at if you have food sensitivity, and also you're getting that supportive secretory IgA there. And I want to close with this, okay? Real food is greater than macros. Real food is greater than macros, okay? Nutrient density and nutritional deficiency on the latter hand is the #1 cause of undesired symptoms in the body and disease state. So our nutritional status impacts the function of our body. Once you have myopically looked at no carbs, get into keto, cool, you're making ketones. Now what are you eating and what is that doing in your body, right? So can you imagine this food growing? Are all of its edible parts intact? What's been done to it since harvest? How many steps in the process, right? And this is where I am a whole food, real food. If I'm talking about adding any natural sweet to my diet, I'm not doing any non-caloric sweeteners because you have to wear a gas mask in your garage to extract from corn erythritol. You just can't make it. It's just not a whole real food. I can chop up a date in a cauliflower dish and it can spread in 5-6 cups and it will not impact your glycemic load. It will not impact your blood sugar. It will not kick you out of ketosis, and it will help to keep your palate more savory. And you're consuming something that has therapeutic benefit versus potential microbacterial stasis or bacterial distress, bloating, distension, loose stools, all of the thing. So start thinking about that. Quality and real food over macros.